Hi, Trainmaster04 here, and in this video I will be reviewing the Lionel Legacy Southern Pacific AC-9, otherwise known as the Reverse Cab Forward.
Albuquerque engine 3001. Start her up, stand by to pull. Over. Copy that, Albuquerque. We'll start her up. 3001 out.
To start this video off, let's go ahead and dive right into the history of the real AC-9s. In this case, the Southern Pacific number 3811 is classified as an AC-9 simple articulated locomotive with a 288 four-wheel arrangement. The class was originally built by the Lima Locomotive Works in 1939 and became the SP's largest and heaviest locomotives as the AC-9s were designed to burn low-grade coal. There were a total of 12 locomotives that were built, starting with engine number 3800 and ending with engine number 3811, which is represented by this model. All locomotives were delivered with a skyline casing atop their boilers, similar to those found on the GS2s and further GS classes. They were tasked with large, fast freight trains traveling between Tucumcari, New Mexico, El Paso, Texas, and Tucson, Arizona. On occasion, these locomotives were also seen pulling the Golden State Limited. Between 1939 to 1953, the AC-9s continued to maintain freight services through the Southwest and in 1950 received an oil conversion. In comparison to their cab-forward cousins, the AC-9s were almost a complete copy of the former, with a few differences to accommodate the coal-burning firebox. Because of their close similarities to the AC-9s, they have been nicknamed the reverse cab-forwards. Also, thanks to the sparse land of the Southwest, locomotive crews did not require a cab-forward type locomotive, and as such, the AC-9s were able to operate that part of the world through World War II. However, between water troubles and dieselization, the class would be removed for other rails. In 1953, the Southern Pacific transferred 11 out of the 12 locomotives to their Modoc line, which ran between Sparks, Nevada and Alturas, California. The locomotives continued to do what they did best by pulling large freight trains between Nevada and California until they were all retired and scrapped in 1956. If it was not for a short supply of adequate water for steam locomotives in the Southwest and a tidal wave known as dieselization, the AC-9s highly likely would have continued to reign in the Southwest till their retirement. With the history covered on the real 3811, we can now move over to the model stats. This model was originally released in Lionel's 2017 Volume 1 catalog and soon shipped out the following year. The model has a combined length of 32¼ inches with a minimum curve radius of 0.72. Under the hood, this model is powered by a large flywheeled motor and is equipped with two fan-driven smoke units, which are both located up front, one for the main smokestack and one for the smoking whistle. Now, both smoke units actually share a smoke fluid reservoir, which means you only have to pour smoke fluid directly down the main stack to feed both of them. For electronics, this model is equipped with Lionel's Legacy rail sounds and is accompanied by their Legacy command system. This means that this model can be operated via 4 of Lionel's command control systems. First is using Lionel's Cap 3 or Base 3 command system, which would allow you to operate the locomotive under its fullest amount of features. The second is using Lionel's Legacy Cap 2 command system. It's the same thing as the Base 3 or Cap 3, but instead you actually use a physical handheld remote. It'll still give you all of the features that this model has to offer, and without any problems. The third is using Lionel's TMCC or Cab 1 command system. This system is their original system, so you will only be able to access the minimum amount of features that this model can offer. So if you want to go and get them all, go with the Legacy or Cap 3. And finally, the last command system is using just simply conventional mode by putting your locomotive on a loop of track, powering it up, and having some good old fun, like with post-war trains. Now, do take note, this model being from 2017 does not have any Bluetooth electronics on board, so you will not be able to use Lionel's Bluetooth app with it. With the model stats and facts taken care of, we can now go to the most important part of the video, which is the details. Starting at the front of the locomotive, here at the pilot, this case, the locomotive is equipped with a solid cast pilot similar to those on the GS2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, and 6s, and any of the other associated locomotives that I've missed from the SP. And in this case, Lionel did go ahead and include that typical aluminum ribbing along the base of it, but as you can see, it is actually not real aluminum, but instead raised bits with aluminum paint to give it that facade. Now, this was a bit disappointing for me, especially considering that Lionel in the past, especially on their GS4s, have actually accomplished this kind of style. Even with any of their TMCC locomotives, you will see actual aluminum striping. So a bit of a disappointment, but nonetheless still acceptable. On either side of the cast pilot, there are two separately applied steps leading up to the lower platform. And speaking of the lower platform, on top of it, there is a separately applied coupler cut bar, which also has a separately applied chain running through the dummy O-gauge coupler, or O-scale coupler, which can then be swapped out for an O-gauge coupler. Over to the side, here are two separately applied brake hoses, and one nice little touch that you don't see very often nowadays is Lionel actually went ahead and painted the ends of these brake hoses in a nice red to really stand out against the silver. Moving on up in the center area, we have two more steps loading up to the upper deck leading to the smoke box front. We'll get to that in a minute. An array of spider-looking handrails and grab irons along the perimeter of said platform, a wonderfully detailed headlamp with two lighted number boards, a separately applied non-lit number board underneath the front platform, separately applied polished brass bell, and pinstriping along the platform. Moving up to the smoke box front, as you can see, most of the details in the sense of the smoke box is really taken up by a wraparound grab iron that runs along the length of the boiler, a separately applied air compressor tank with a radiator or safety grate in front of it, a service platform for crews to go and service the two separately applied air compressors, separately applied piping going to the air compressors and to the tank, some minor molded-in details in the front, such as pipework, an unopening door leading into the smoke box itself, a separately applied Typhoon air horn, and two separately applied marker lights. Now, as of the making of this video, all of Lionel's legacy engines are equipped with LED marker lights so that you can actually go and change the color from green to white or simply turn them off. Now, since this locomotive is pre that kind of technology, at least in the form of in legacy locomotives, this locomotive only has solid green lights. Moving over to the engineer side of the locomotive, here at the bottom is the first set of massive 8 driving wheels for this freight locomotive, and as you can see already, this thing is loaded with details. In this case, the pilots and cylinders primarily are molded in details with rivets and brake rigging here and there. The running gear itself has been chemically darkened to give it that freight locomotive look. However, the driving wheels themselves give a nice contrast with the pinstriping around their rims. Above the cylinders and everywhere else, in this case, is the Walschaerts valve gear, which is correct for the AC-9s, molded in mechanical lubricator, separately applied piping going along underneath the boiler itself, massive piping going to and from the smoke box, and then we get to the running board itself. The running board itself has not been pinstriped similar to the front service deck, but it is a nice little detail along the length of the boiler. Now, speaking of the boiler, in this case, the smoke box has been nicely painted in a bit of a grayish look. In comparison to the prototype, this is fairly bright, but still is a nice contrast in comparison to this void of black paint, and is also nicely detailed with molded-in rivets, 3 separately applied builder's plates, separately applied handrail that runs along the length of the boiler, separately applied throttle linkage, more piping for an injector, various skyline casing, and also a lit number board with the numbers X3811, which too also comes on when the locomotive's in operation. Continuing on down, yet again, the second set of 8 drivers does not disappoint with those white-walled tires and darkened side rods. Details in this area are simply similar, with the cylinders also having the same rivet detailing, but also yet even more large steam pipes coming in and out of them. Above the second mechanical lubricator, as well as the second set of Walschaerts valve gear, is the separately applied power reverser. In this case, it does kind of get lost amongst all of the black paint of the under part of the boiler, but it's still fairly noticeable when you actually look at the model. Other details include yet even more separately applied pipework, a nicely detailed firebox, again painted in that light gray, something a little bit lighter for my taste, but still fairly nice, a massive die-cast metal ash pan, which in this case, this locomotive is equipped with Lionel's variable ash pan glow effect, since this model is a coal burner, so pre-1950s design. Running board continues along, ending at the cab, which we'll get to here in a second. And then the boiler itself also has yet even more details. The daylight colors eventually do transition into the locomotive itself. Primarily in the front, it is not really noticeable if you look at it straight on, but when it comes to the side, this is where the money shot comes in. The 2 feathers of the two-tone orange and red and silver striping come in, join into the cab, and then continues to flow along the locomotive. For details, there are yet even more molded in boiler bands, steps, hatches to cover up appliances, continuation of both the throttle linkage as well as the handrail, and both, as of course, do end in the cab. Now, speaking of the cab, this cab is actually quite unique in the sense that it is an all-weathered cab. Details-wise, there's not really a ton. It is a solid die-cast metal, separately applied cab with hardly any rivet details. But what details there are separately applied. In this case, there are 2 grab irons, separately applied ladder, water injector, and various other piping going along the underside or side of the cab. In this case, the cab is also painted in the daylight striping, has the engine identification underneath a crisp 3811, and also the daylight logo, which typically on the GS locomotives would be at the front, but since there's no room or any kind of side skirting, Lionel opted to put it right here. And then finally, located underneath the cab and the firebox is the 4-wheel trailing truck, a little bit less in the detail department as all of it is molded in, but still a nice little detail bit. Looking at the back of the locomotive, starting inside, here you can see the cab back head itself is actually nicely detailed and also in the coal arrangement. And when I mean it's in the coal arrangement is the firebox door is actually drilled out and you can actually see the firebox glow coming through into the cab. Other details include a V-shape assembly on the molded in valves on the fireman's side to indicate this locomotive has an automatic stoker, which the real prototype did. Other details on the back head are various hand-painted valves and gauges, molded-in pipework, and other molded-in equipment for the crew to operate the locomotive. Now, speaking of crew, in this case, the typical crew count for a legacy locomotive would be 2, an engineer and a fireman, but in this case, there are actually 3. Engineer, fireman, and another crew member, which you can see the back of his arm towards the back of the cab itself. For windows, the cab does have a many, in this case, 1 on each side of the locomotive, 1 for the doors, and then 1 for the fronts of the cab. The cab itself, in this case, is one of the biggest cabs I have seen. It even rivals a Union Pacific Big Boys in the sense that it is so deep. Really, most of the detail that Lionel put into this locomotive is decent, but in this case, you really wouldn't be able to see, especially if the tender is right up against the locomotive. Now, on the outside of the cab, there is primarily molded in details that wouldn't really be seen unless the model had a really close connection to each other. But in this case, since this locomotive does have to run on 072, there is a bit of a gap, so there are a few little bits of detail you can see, such as the coal auger. And finally, at the very bottom, here is the locomotive's drawbar, and in this case, this drawbar is equipped with the infrared sensor, which sends signal between the tender and the locomotive. On top of the locomotive, and as you can see right off the bat, there's really not a lot of details to be shown in the sense of separately applied due to the skyline casing as mentioned earlier in the history segment. But still, this video wouldn't be complete without this segment, so let's get to it. First up, on the right-hand side is the dual stacks. Now, do take note, the locomotive, as stated earlier, is equipped with 2 fan-driven smoke units, which you can both fill directly through the stack. One of the things I do like about this model that Lionel still seems to have difficulty with when it comes to smoking whistles located in the general vicinity of the stack, or if they share the same smoke fluid reservoir, is the smoke from the whistle instead bleeds through the smokestack itself, so you get a giant plume of smoke out of the stack, but none out of the whistle. Thankfully though, this locomotive does not have that problem. I believe that's due to the fiberglass packing being fairly better, and also there being a divider. Continuing on down, the casing itself really covers up all of the major details such as sand domes, steam domes, but there are a few molded in details such as the first of 2 sand hatches, 2 separately applied grab irons, rivets, a steam dome covering. In this case, that's really not a dome itself, but more of a manhole cover plate. Moving on down, here we actually have the first side of the actual boiler itself. In this case, there is a rectangular cutout in the skyline casing to reveal the 4 separately applied safety valves. Now, since this model was before Lionel decided to go a little cheap and start producing their brass separately applied parts to look more like a, oh, we've got a plastic piece here, let's give it a cheap brass looking paint and nobody will notice it. Well, in this case, these are actual good looking polished parts, so if you do get one of these models, you do not have to fear that they are going to look like cheap plastic. Moving over, here is the second sand dome, or in this case, the second sand dome hatch with 2 more separately applied grab irons. Another cutout over on the fireman's side, which we'll get to later. Molded in rivets, gotta have those rivets. A turret hatch, in this case, again, unfortunately, is a molded in detail. And then at the rear, the cab roof. Now again, this cab just continues to become quite unique in the fact that it is actually built into 2 sections, the main cab area and then the extended add-on to make it into a all-weather cab. It's really unique in the sense that they are not the same size and also that there is this stair step somewhere in the middle. Now, as of that fact, there's also 2 separately applied hatches which actually open up and close. Finally, taking a quick look on the fireman's side of the locomotive, and as you can see, it is primarily identical to the engineer's side with a few minute differences such as the angular whistle on this side of the locomotive. In this case, the whistle itself is a separately applied piece, and probably one of the coolest features that this model has is that the actual whistle steam smoke effect, instead of coming through a hole behind the skyline skirting, instead it actually shoots straight out through the whistle. Lionel went ahead and actually drilled out the upper portion of the whistle piece, allowing the pipework to go from the skyline casing into the whistle and the smoke eject out through the top. It's a little bit of a misstep in the sense of how accurate it is, but it's still quite nicely done considering it really hides the hole and also the smoke itself is actually emitting from the whistle. On this side as well, there are more various different types of pipe work and also a better view of that cutout for the dynamo generator. Moving over to the front of the tender, as you can see, thanks to that all-weather cab, there's really not a lot of details to be shown other than a bunch of molded-in rivet detailing, the tender end of that molded-in coal auger, the tender end of the wireless drawbar, some grill work on the interior. In this case, this would be for slatting to manually access the coal load from up top, and some separately applied piping and grab irons up top, which you'll get a better view later in this video. On the engineer side, this is where all of the daylight colors come to a head and then eventually blend all together. Now, Lionel did a really nice job of making sure that the width of the first two entry stripes on the tender really do match against the Locomotive's cab. And in this case, they really do blend quite nicely together and make it seem like it's one entire engine. In this case, the colors themselves are very nicely crisp with molded-in rivet detailing scattered all about the side paneling, some legible data script towards the bottom, the Southern Pacific lines up top, a nice contrasting black sections to really give it that nice pop with the bright colors, two sets of six-wheeled trailing trucks or tender trucks, both of which have white-walled wheels, separately applied toolbox in the center. On the other side, there is a brake cylinder assembly, also separately applied, a separately applied builder's plate, grab iron, and step ladder for the back, which we're going to right now. At the back of the tender, this is where the daylight colors come to an end and the freight engine persona comes back. In this case, detail-wise, down at the bottom we have the lower deck for the tender. It has some molded-in grab irons, a little bit of a miss, especially since easily pilot holes could be drilled into here, but still a nice touch. Here's a second set of separately applied ladders going up to this deck, and in the center, a separately applied coupler cut bar. Now, thanks to the electrocoupler being down here in the middle, the coupler cut bar does not have a chain, but that does not mean there isn't any form of functionality with this coupler, as this is the Locomotive's electrocoupler, which can be thrown by using Lionel's Legacy or Team CC command systems. This engine being built in 2017, it does not have Bluetooth command control, so you can only operate this engine via Legacy and Team CC. Up on the back panel itself, it is fairly detailed with a reverse light, molded-in rivet detailing, separately applied grab iron in the center, separately applied ladder going up top, two marker lights. In this case, these are only turned on when to be red, and another grab iron. Finally, up on the tender, here is the massive coal load, which is a little different to see in the comparison of Southern Pacific steam locomotives. 90% of them actually have oil bunkers, so to see a coal load and then Southern Pacific lines directly underneath it just seems a little bit weird. But beyond that point, let's get into the details itself. The coal load itself is real coal granulated quite nicely and fairly secure to the upper portion of the tender. Really, it is quite a nice little coal load with some variation in depth and also height. On the tender deck itself, it is crisscrossed with multiple molded-in rivets, 4 water hatches, which we'll get back to in a second, a molded-in coal pusher to force the coal located towards the back down into the hogger. Nice detail, you don't see that very often. 3 toolboxes, 2 in the back and 1 up in the front. Coming back to the water hatches, this ended up being a bit of an interesting surprise. Typically, all 4 would be separately items, and in this case, only 2 of them are functional. The very back one, which reveals nothing, and then the center one that reveals the manual control volume knob. The other 2, this one and the very front one, are actually dummies. They are cast-in details. Earlier, when I was making this recording, I found myself trying to open up this second to last one, and it refused. So I ended up taking about 2 minutes trying to figure out what in the world was going on, and just to find out that it was a molded-in detail. So don't make my mistake and try to rip your fingernails out with trying to pull up this water hatch, because it is not going to move. With both the locomotive and tender taken care of, we can now go ahead and fire up the model. So, without further ado, here is the AC-9.
This is the yard office. Do you copy? I
I read you. Over.
We should have you rolling in just a moment. Watch your signals. Over.
Yes, sir. Start up and stand by. Out.
With the locomotive all fired up, let's go over all the sound features. So first up is the whistle and the Typhoon air horn. Now, nowadays you would see these locomotives equipped with either 3 whistles, 5 whistles, and maybe even a couple of horns or just a single horn mixed in with it. But this locomotive is pre that time frame, so in this case it's just 1 whistle and the 1 horn. Next up, here's the bell. Here is the steam blowdown sound. Here is the water and coal fill-up sound.
My water's full. Over.
Copy that.
My coal's full. Over.
Roger that.
And finally, here is a sampling of the crew and tower comm chatter. Again, this model being an older version, it's more specific and generic in comparison to what Lionel has been doing with the tower comms these days.
Dispatcher, am I clear to the outbound? Over.
Roger that. Your route is lined and locked. Have a safe run. Over.
Acknowledged. I've got clear boards. Out.
This is the Yardmaster. You are cleared to depart on signal indication. Over.
Acknowledged. I've got clear boards. Out. Dispatcher, ready to roll. Can I pull? Over.
Your route is lined and locked. Have a safe run. Over.
Roger that. Here we go. Out.
This is the Yardmaster. Sit tight for a minute. We've got some traffic to clear first. Over.
Roger. Standing by. Out. Tower, waiting on that signal. Am I clear yet? Over.
Sit tight for a minute. We've got some traffic to clear first. Over.
Gotcha, dispatcher. Waiting for a clear. Out.
With a tender full of coal and water, and a nice consist of reefers and other miscellaneous freight hooked up behind the tender, we can now move on out and get to the funnest part of the video, which is running the model itself.
pulling up. That turtle box is burning up. That car's axle's on fire. We gotta stop. Watch out. Flames are shooting out from the other side, too. Careful there. It's a blazer. Flames jump out all over the place. Drive it out. We need another fire extinguisher. Careful there. It's a blazer. Flames jump out all over the place. Let's pull this car out of the train and onto the siding. Woo, man, I'll tell you what. Car doctor's going to want to take a look at this car. Whew, great job, guys. I think we averted a catastrophe. Whew, I hate days like this. I hear you on that.
That's about it for this video, but before you go, let me go ahead and answer the two questions that I normally ask around this time of the video, and they are, what is the original MSRP price for one of these models, and also, what is my opinion on it? Well, to start off, Lionel has this model priced at $2,000. Since this model was made in 2017 and also in the popular daylight paint scheme, the second-hand market is the only place to find one of these models for sale. As of the making of this video, there is currently one for sale on eBay in the daylight paint scheme around the price of $2,180. Now, you can also find any of the other standard black 3800 AC-9s or even the TMCC versions, which also came in the black version, and those typically have been running around the $2,000 to $1,000 mark range respectively. With the MSRP taken care of, let me move on to the second question, which was, what is my opinion on this model? Considering this model is 8 years old and has continued to hold its value, I am quite happy to say that this model is a great example of the old modern Lionel. Now, do take note when I mean the old modern Lionel, I mean this model came out of the factory 100% ready to go. The paint was crisp, wasn't too bright, the running of it didn't go into flames as soon as power was put to it. It pulls like a dream, and all of the details are just perfect. None of those plastic brass pieces that act like brass, they are all turned and polished. It is a perfect example also of being a freight hauling locomotive. It just goes, you turn it on, gives no fuss, and it just pulls. It does give a great show with it being an articulated. Having the whistle steam also helps. And speaking of said whistle steam, it is not going straight through the stack, but instead it is actually going through the whistle. So whatever the manufacturer did inside the smoke unit to ensure that the smoke for the whistle came out of the whistle, they did a good job. The only caveat I do have with this model is I did have to fix the run program switch, but then again, this model is an 8-year-old model, so it has been on the shelf for a little while and things happen. And then the other caveat I have with it is the volume. Every time I would fire up the locomotive, the crew talk sounds would come on very strong, but then I'd start rolling the locomotive around the track and it'd be a little bit quiet. Considering it's a big articulated locomotive, the heaviest steam locomotive that Southern Pacific had, I was expecting a booming locomotive chuffing down to the main line, but unfortunately I did not get that. Overall, I would highly recommend purchasing one of these models for those who are Southern Pacific fans or are simply looking to add a freight hauler to your roster, as this model will definitely not disappoint. That's it for this product review video, but before I go, I want to thank you all for clicking on this video and watching it to the very end. It takes me a considerable amount of time to research, produce, edit, and script these videos for you all to enjoy, so I greatly appreciate the patience and the support. If you would like to help my channel to continue to grow, then consider subscribing, as that will automatically register you to receive notifications as to when I post new videos or even make a community post on the channel homepage. If you would like to take it one step further, check out my new merch store down below, where you can find everything from hats, shirts, and posters with photos of trains that I've taken on my trips or railroad ads that evoke the golden age of passenger travel. If you like this video, also please leave a like, as that lets me know I am producing content that is worth for YouTube to go and post for you to enjoy. But anyways, my name is Trainmaster04, and I'll be seeing you next time.
Dispatch, this is 3001. We are done for the day. Heading to the register room to sign out.